Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is my first time to actually speak English in over a year, so I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work, but I will try anyway. For this lecture, I was asked to contribute something about the connection of science and society, and I found quite quickly that there is a problem there. There is a fundamental disconnect between science and human experience. There is a disconnect between what we always thought science to be, a tool for advancing humanity, a tool for gaining knowledge and doing things, and the way science today is integrated in society. And it started several hundred years ago in the 1660s with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a project of people who said that superstition and old ideas, old organizations were holding society and mankind back, and instead of traditions and so on, they promoted reason, they promoted natural science, they promoted advancement to better the human condition, to make the world a better place. And the image here is actually from a later stage after the actual Enlightenment period of Michael Faraday delivering a lecture to the public, in public. So the idea is, the idea of science in society is that science is a tool. It's something we do to gain knowledge, to change the world. And a few centuries on, this mission still stands. That is what, for many people, science is all about. Bertrand Russell, a philosopher, he was a founder of analytical philosophy. He stated it in his book, The Impact of Science on Society. Science helps us with two things: to know things and to do things, and with both advance society, to create well-being for many people. So that's the original mission of science, the original Enlightenment. And already at that point in the 50s, there was skepticism about how this works out, how actually the mission of science was connected to the well-being of mankind, that there might be problems, that it didn't work as planned. So here in Germany, not far away in Frankfurt, there was a group of philosophers, of sociologists, social scientists, the Frankfurt School, who developed critical theory and developed a healthy skepticism of the mission of enlightenment, of the role of science in society. And today we can ask where we stand. Did it work? Did science actually make life better for everybody, for mankind, for all humans? And it's pretty easy. It didn't work out for everybody. This, for example, is a rather poignant example. Well, an electronic waste dump in Ghana, where the first world electronic waste. So, for example, the computers you do science on are dumped onto people, poor people, who risk their health to get a living out of our way. So it didn't work out for everyone, and there are other issues. On one hand, there was a lot of advancement through science, through technology. We have modern medicine, we have technology that enables us to communicate across the continents and so on. We invented human rights, and many people count human rights as one of the major achievements of Enlightenment, of science, of those modern idea of reason shaping the world. And freedom, of course, is another product of reason. On the other hand, we have poverty and hunger are not defeated yet, so there is a kind of failure. There's still inequality, there is racism, sexism, anti-Semitism. There is still oppression, and there are problems like destruction of ecosystems, the depletion of resources, climate change, that are intricately linked to the progress of science and technology. So it's actually a bit our fault. And there is a peculiar order here. For poverty and hunger, we can say for science, okay, we didn't defeat poverty and hunger, but we will get there. We are on the way. The world is getting better thanks to Enlightenment, thanks to science, and thanks to progress. And same is for inequality, maybe. But in racism and sexism, science is already a bit ambivalent, because there is a long history of racism in science, there is a long history of sexism in science, and the struggle to deal with these problems has just started. So it's not entirely sure if racism and sexism are really an integral part of the structure of science, or the structure of enlightening. It was something the Frankfurt School, the social theorists, actually suspected, actually criticized, that there was some kind of power structure integrated to science that in cases promoted such problems. And as Bertrand Russell in his 1950s book noted, oppression by the state and other actors is actually promoted by science and technology. Oppression gets easier by employing technology, by communications, by surveillance. So it's a really sketchy outlook at the moment. And of course, a very, very big issue at this point is market capitalism. I don't want to talk about market capitalism and science here, because it's a huge and ambivalent topic, which would be a topic for a separate lecture. But of course, there's a huge question if it's really a good idea to dump all science into the market and see what floats. As I said, discussion for another time. I would like to stay closer to home, closer to science, closer to the issue here at HIT. You're doing a lot of computer science, so we may take a look at transhumanism and artificial intelligence and technology. And there is real concern that humans, that we are overwhelmed by our own creations, by our technology. So one poignant example, of course, this is from art. This is from the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, where a neurotic computer kills off the crew of a spaceship in a somewhat cruel way at times. But please note that 2001, the movie, is not just about destructive technology, but in the end, I don't know, who knows the movie 2001? Okay, not so many. Everyone should have seen it. No, I'm serious, because the movie is about the same thing I'm talking about here. But because we have a very destructive artificial intelligence, but in the end, it's about humanity. It's not about technology bringing us to our stars, but technology leading to ourselves confronting our humanity. So that's the movie about. But what people remember is this red computer eye of the supercomputer, the artificial intelligence that kills off the humans on the spaceship. And we don't need to wait for a malevolent superintelligence to be afraid of science and technology, because with science and technology, we actually created a world of black boxes. A world that is, to many people, to most people actually, fairly intransparent. We don't really understand the electronic of our cars. We really don't understand our smartphones. We don't understand how our logistics works that transport our food to ourselves. We live surrounded by technology we barely understand. Of course, we have some kind of data trail, a data cloud that invisibly surrounds us and is trackable by anyone, really. Artificial intelligence already is better at playing chess than we. That's not a problem, but when the artificial intelligence gets better at maybe ruling the world than mankind, we may have a problem. And of course, for many, many people, science is the biggest black box there is, because everything around us is ruled by science and technology. Science and technology is so deeply integrated in society, mostly in the shape of technology, but also in the political discussions we have. And think of climate change, think of democracy, think of medicine. There's always science involved, and always scientific arguments being made. And for most people in our society, these are black boxes. They have to believe what scientists say, or they don't believe it, because it is very, very difficult for most people to get a look behind the scenes. The theory of enlightenment, that we can, by reason, take a look at our world to understand science, to understand our world, all this is for most people theoretical. Most people will never have the opportunity, never have the time, never have the money to really understand those black boxes. And we mustn't forget that. So are we, that is not we in this room, the scientists, are we as humanity losing control? There are people who say, yes, this is intrinsic to technology. Arthur C. Clarke, a science fiction author, stated 3 laws of technology. The first 2 laws are about the impossible and the possible, that when people say something is impossible, they are most likely wrong. The first law. The second law is you have to try the impossible to find out what actually is possible. Both laws should be very, very familiar to scientists, because that's what scientists do. Scientists try out things that have been impossible only a few years ago nowadays and find that they are actually possible. But the third law that Clarke stated was this: any sufficiently advanced technology becomes indistinguishable from magic. It sounds like somewhat optimistic, but let us remember how this works out not so long ago, and in many parts of the world, even today, very, very few people are actually comfortable with magic. So there was witch burnings. There are still today in parts of Africa and Asia people persecuted and murdered because they are called witches, they are called wizards, because they are accused of black magic. So this word, magic, is a very, very dangerous thing really for science and technology. Besides where we started out in the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was about reason that should free us from magic, from the superstition and old religion. So by science and technology, we build a world of magic, again, a world of technological magic. We can understand that is created, that consists of black boxes that are intransparent, and that is very dangerous because most people that don't understand them may be sort of suspicious about what's happening there. And that's where anti-science is coming from. Of course, flat earthers are a bit on the funny side, but it stops being funny when politicians come along and say things like that. There is a long tradition of anti-intellectualism in the world, and nowadays it's getting stronger. Of course, it's getting stronger because it's getting louder, it gets amplified by the internet, by conspiracy theorists, by the fringe, but also I think there is a cultural effect. A cultural effect that rejects the black boxes, that gets suspicious of all those experts that are detached from societies and that are detached from human experience. So there are more and more people who seem to view science and technology, especially science, not as a tool to create knowledge, to learn things, to do things, to make the world better for everyone, but as tools for a certain progressive ideology they resent. So in many circles, science is viewed as an intransparent construct of an elite of experts that try to rule the world to their own ends. And that's pretty dangerous. That's That's what I call the great gap. We have a great gap between what science is, the abstract, the research, the objective, or the attempt to be objective, the methodical research of reality, and the actual human experience, which is something completely different. The human experience is mostly ignorance. We as humans generally don't know what happens around us. We are in everyday life, we depend on guesswork. We are very, very good at guessing what other people may think, but we get suspicious about the intentions of other people. So we deal in ignorance, we deal in ambivalence. We don't deal so much in facts and knowledge and experiment and systematic research. We are more into hunches, and so the human condition is less about facts, less about dispute or research. It's more about hunches and meaning. And science is very, very reluctant to bridge that gap. And I think the suspicion many people have about science comes from that gap. Comes from the difference of the human experience from the scientific abstract. And science today is not anymore a tool that delivers something, a better world. Science, as I said, is integrated in our society to a point where it's practically impossible for everyone to avoid to be in contact with science. So it is today not possible to bridge the gap by telling people, okay, you don't understand science, but it doesn't matter because we deliver a cure for cancer, we deliver free energy. We cannot bribe society into ignoring these huge problems. Quite the other way. Science has become far too powerful and far too important to be so detached from human experience. We have to integrate science in some way into human experience. Otherwise, it will be magic again. It may be witch burning. It may be that society believes that science gets too powerful. That think about Trump, Donald Trump, the U.S. president, who apparently thinks to have a mandate to destroy scientific organizations, to destroy scientific data, to silence scientists. So this is not an abstract possibility. We need to understand why there are parts in our societies that reject science, and sometimes violently reject science. And I think this gap, the great gap between science and human experience, is one explanation. The other explanation may be that, either we promise too much, like in press releases, there's always a cure for cancer, free energy, and so on and so on. So we promote science as a tool, as a technical fix for our problem. But today we are in a situation where we can't just solve our problems by scientific discovery alone. So an example from my research 10 years ago, I was researching about AIDS affinity to certain receptors, and there was always a struggle to find a vaccine or a superior medication for the AIDS virus. But the thing we found out very quickly after researching the topic was that finding some kind of cure or vaccine was only the first step, and in some sense the least important step. We found out that there were other factors much more important. For example, access, economic inequality. In places like Asia, in Africa, it's not a matter of just find a cure and then give it to everybody. It's a matter of building a world where a cure can be brought to everybody. So it's a political question, economic question, it's a question of racism, it's a question of priorities and money and so on, and not just a question of science. So in the end, we can say, okay, we may have a way to create a vaccine or to create better medication, but we don't have a scientific way to create a world where our achievements, our advances reach the people that need them. At that point, we meet another way of being ignorant in science. Point where society has to change, where we depend on society to make things right. And the other thing is, of course, we will never know everything. I think so science will never solve a problem for us, and science will never answer the big questions, what being human is all about, where we are from, what's our point here, and the big questions that we grapple with for the last 10,000 years. So there will not be a scientific theory for everything that solves the philosophical and metaphysical questions. And we have to accept that science is, as a tool, at times important, and that is not, well, that's not how we sell science normally. Science normally is a superpower. But in reality, as many scientists realize, everyone realizes, science doesn't create knowledge. When it comes to numbers, to extent, science creates much more new ignorance we didn't even know about. So when we make a scientific discovery, we gain a bit of knowledge, but we learn a lot more about what we don't know. So as a consequence, with scientific advances, ignorance grows faster than knowledge. Of course, it doesn't devalue knowledge, but it is a clue to a different perspective of science, of scientific discovery. We are moving away from science being a tool that creates knowledge and creates technology. We move towards an idea of science as a human endeavor, in the sense that it's not all about textbooks and new technology and so on. It's about confronting ignorance. It's about confronting the things we don't know. So this is very, very important to understand, and this is very, very important to integrate into our future dealings with science. In the future, we don't need to talk about science as a tool. Everyone knows that what we can do with science, that we can cure some illnesses and build technology. But what we need to understand is that we create ideas that incorporate ignorance. That we by doing science, by having science, build a relationship not by knowing, but also by not knowing. By accepting that we can't get at a truth, and that science cannot tell us how to deal with problems that are problems of society, that are problems of politics. So today is a pretty important aspect, I think. Today there are a lot of people who, on one hand, advise government and politics on science, like what does science say about a certain issue, and on the other hand, there are politicians that ask scientists, well, we have that and that problem, so what does science tell us to do? What do we need to do about it? Okay, politicians usually only listen to scientists that tell them what they want to hear, but in principle, we live in a society, we live in an age of science where people look to science for solutions, but science cannot give us solutions. Another form of ignorance that we have to accept, that we have to deal with. And science is very, very bad, at least so far, at dealing with ignorance and ambivalence and impotence, but humans have always not known. Humans have always been in the dark, have always had to accept that they may never know, that they may never solve certain mysteries. So where science goes ahead, sees a mystery, sees a problem, sees the unknown, and says, okay, let's solve this. Let's destroy ignorance. Let's find out the fact. Let's write a new textbook about something we never knew before. Let's do away with ignorance. I just said that ignorance, on the other hand, is a very integral part of science. And we in science, in my opinion, have to learn, and this is just my personal hunch. I look at art and I see that there are many ways to get ignorance to get not knowing integrated into personal experience, into the human experience. And I think we need to bring that into science in some way. I have thought a bit about how can we do that. I don't know who plays a musical instrument here. That's not everybody, but many at least. I think what we need to do, what science needs to do, is to find a way to interact with the subject of science in a way that goes beyond, I want to know that, I want to find out the facts, I want a method to find out the facts. What we need is to promote. I think many scientists actually have that, but rarely ever talk about it. But we need to promote the idea that we have a personal relation to the object of scientific research. And I found that in social media, something like that is actually happening. In social media, scientists who are at work are in a unique position to talk to other people, and there we see an image of science, of scientists, that is not just related to the output of science, but to the intimate relation between the object of science with the natural world, the way of finding things out, the way of dealing with ignorance, and the individual scientist. So I think it is already being done just by scientists going around the formal way of publishing science, the formal way, the established way of talking about science. So I think in a certain way, technology already helps us to achieve different ways to interact with our objects of science and to find a way when we can interact in a way that is beyond, that is different from the scientific method, from objectivity, from the abstract. When we can interact on a human level with scientific research, with scientific thinking, then everyone else can as well. And so by finding a more art-like way to think about science and scientific research, we can bridge the great gap between human experience and scientific experience. So, and you may have noticed a Star Trek quote in the title. And the Star Trek quote in the title was because when I first realized that there was a great gap to bridge, I found that someone already in popular culture had bridged that gap, and that is Mr. Spock. Who doesn't know who Mr. Spock is? Okay, it proves my point. Mr. Spock is probably the most beloved character in television history because he embodied what I was just talking about, because he came from his logic, the science, objectivity, from the abstract, but in his person, in the way Leonard Nimoy characterized him, embodied the struggle. He learned to be human, to find the human condition, to learn about humanity from this logical, from this abstract side. And if you want to walk out of here with a concept what science needs to do to get closer to society, to bridge the gap, and to not be a tool, but be a part of society. And then think of the way Mr. Spock came from logic to humanity, because that is what we want to do, that's what we need to do, and that is what society, what everybody so much loved about the character. And that's a sign of hope for us and for society, that in the end, society loved Mr. Spock. So as a conclusion, we have to accept that science is not a tool anymore, that science has become, for good or bad, an integral part of human experience in our society, and it will get even more. We will get even more technology. Science will get more important in our politics and in our social life. So the need to make science not just a tool, not just an abstract method, but some way, some kind of human experience, that need, that demand will grow. So there is something, final frontier, if you want to say it like that, is the new human experience that waits to be explored. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.